Thank you all for joining the Excellent Data Equals Meaningful Analytics Improving Vendor Report Information Management webinar today. We will begin shortly here in just a few minutes. As we wait for all attendees to join, we invite you to view our future webinars. Registration for any NASPO-sponsored webinar is available at www.naspo.org/webinars. I will be back shortly and we will begin the presentation. Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining the Excellent Data Equals Meaningful Analytics Improving Vendor Report Information Management webinar today. We will begin here in just a few minutes. As we wait for all attendees to join, we invite you to view our future webinars. Registration for any NASPO webinar is available at www.naspo.org/webinars. We will begin here in about 3 or 4 minutes. Give time for everybody to get on. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the for joining us with this NASPO webinar, Excellent Data Equals Meaningful Analytics, Improving Vendor Report Information Management. As we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. First, all lines, so everyone's lines, have been muted for today's presentation. After the presentation, if after or during the presentation you have any questions pertaining to the content, please utilize the question and answer box that's on your screen. It should be located right next to your chat function. At the end of the presentation, I will go through each question that has been asked with our presenters so we can all participate in some group learning. Also, today's webinar is eligible for 1 UPPCC credit hour. To receive your certificate at the end of the webinar, please email me, Lori Denhart, with your request. My email address I will put in the chat function, but it is also, I'll say it now, it's ldenhart. So that's L, D as in David, E, N as in Nancy, H-A-R-T @NASPO.org. After the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be asked to complete a few survey questions to provide feedback. We ask that you take just a couple minutes to complete this survey so that we may continually improve our online programs and offerings. Now, today's guest speaker is Mr. Jonathan Gasson. He is a data analyst from the great state of Massachusetts. Jonathan moved to the U.S. in 2008 from the U.K. He has over 10 years of state service with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He has an associate's degree in computer science. He, for 7 years, worked at the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development as a business analyst, and his goal was to help implement the new unemployment online filing system in the state of Massachusetts. It was also a data warehouse for federal reporting. He moved to the Operational Service Division about 3 years ago as a data analyst. He has served as a project manager and a data analyst on the vendor reports management project that we are discussing today. Jonathan, we are so excited to have you. We're so ready for your webinar, and I'm now going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to listen to this presentation. I'm excited to talk to you all about it. Our project, Excellent Data Equals Meaningful Analytics, Improving Vendor Report Information Management, or as we call it here at OSD, the VRM system. So I'm going to use that acronym and not VRM, but that's an introduction to that. So like I said, I'm excited to talk about this. It's essentially a sales reporting system. We put a lot of time and effort here at OSD into building this application, and we're very proud of the results here. So, just a brief outline of what we're going to go through today. I'm going to talk about the old system, our old VRM system that we had, and some of the problems and issues with that system, some of the steps we took to fix the system, the new system and what that entails, and the results of the system. We'll spend a lot of time talking about what we got as a result of all this hard work that we put in to this project. So let's get started. Okay, just a brief introduction to the Operational Services Division, or OSD. We are an oversight agency for procurement within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the Executive Office of Administration and Finance. That second point there, that's our mission statement. I won't read it out. I'll let you guys read that. So there's many departments within OSD, the main one being strategic sourcing. And we also have training, marketing, local government enablement departments. We also include other departments such as the Office of Vehicle Management and Supply Diversity Office, so a number of functions that fall within the Operational Services Division. Like I said, the largest department here at OSD is the Strategic Sourcing Department. They are the main consumers of the data that we're going to talk about here, and the system that we brought in to collect that data they were the key drivers for requesting that system be created in the first place. They were the folks who had all the issues with the system that we tried to fix and that we did fix, and they're the folks who use this data the most and who find the most use out of collecting all this information. So even though strategic sourcing is our main user of this data, all the other departments within OSD were able to get some benefit from all the new information that we're collecting, and so even though it was specifically for sourcing that we did this project, a lot of folks were able to gain a lot of benefits from it. So strategic sourcing, they're primarily responsible for creating and maintaining statewide contracts here in Massachusetts. In our statewide contracts, we have over 100 of those currently, and they cover a wide variety of goods and services, everything from bottled water to consulting services to translation services to playground equipment, for example. So cover a wide variety of things that are on these contracts. And currently we have over 1,800 vendors awarded on these contracts. One thing to note as we move forward is executive agencies within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are required to use statewide contracts for the goods and services that are covered on those contracts. Even though executive branch agencies are required to use it, that many other entities are able to take advantage of the benefits of using statewide contracts. Those include municipalities, counties, eligible nonprofits. That's 3 examples. But anywhere that uses public money basically is able to use the statewide contracts. And the vendors who are on our contracts, they for the privilege of being on a statewide contract, they pay us a 1% administrative fee on all the sales that they make to eligible buyers. We call them purchasing entities, or eligible buyers on these statewide contracts. And obviously this money, this generates revenue for the Commonwealth, it generates revenue for the Operational Services Division. We're actually funded by that administrative fee. So it's very important for us to know how our vendors are performing on our statewide contracts and how our contracts are performing in general, like what are the volume of dollars that we're getting from these contracts. So a little bit of background here is our reporting requirements. Every contractor a vendor who's on a statewide contract is required to report 3 things every quarter. Their VRM sales report, which we're going to mainly discuss today. That's the sales that they make on the contract. So that's line by line, what they sold, to whom, how much, and what the unit price was, those kind of data points. They report that to us every quarter, as well as the revenue they collect, and pay their 1% admin fee to us. And they also have to report any spend they have with a diverse partner. So that is a women-owned business or a minority-owned business. When a vendor is awarded a statewide contract, they agree to spend a certain percentage of the revenue they make from being on the contract with a diverse partner, we call them. And to make sure that vendors are staying compliant with this requirement, we ask them to submit that information to us quarterly. So these reports, all 3 of these are due to be submitted to OSD within 45 days of the quarter ending. And the VRM reporting system that we're going to talk about today is where we collect the information for the first and the third report on that list. So it's the VRM sales report and the supply diversity spend. They're both included on this system. So why do we require all these reports? So the VRM sales report is the most important because it's the only way that we can identify the total spend on a contract. For many entities that use statewide contract, they do not use our state accounting system or our e-procurement system, Combis, to conduct their purchases on statewide contract. So we have no real window into their total spend. And it would be impractical to ask all of the folks who do make use of our statewide contracts to report that information to us, because we have over 5,000 unique entities who do actually make use of statewide contract, and that's not including the folks who, if we were to ask everybody to report, we would need to know the folks who didn't use statewide contract to tell us that they didn't use it that quarter. So asking all those folks to tell us what they use in statewide contract would be impractical, so we ask our vendors to report their sales each quarter. And like I said, it's the only way that we can get a window into the total spend on the contract. And we can get a complete picture of the total spend across all of our contracts this way. And we use this data to drive agency goals. We use it to evaluate contract performance, as I said before, and we use it as the foundation for procurements and negotiations when we go to negotiate with vendors on new contracts. This is the key data that we use to make those decisions. So that's the background. Here's give a little brief overview of the old reporting system. I could spend a whole hour, 2 hours talking about all the various problems that we had with the old reporting system, but I'll try and keep it down to a few major issues that we had. So the old system was a collection of macro-enabled spreadsheets and access databases. We would send a spreadsheet to our vendors with the reporting requirements, and they would mail it. They would fill it out and email it back to us. We would have our coordinators reviewing the mailboxes, the inboxes, to get these reports back, and they would review the reports. This would be the initial review. They would review for making sure there was no errors in the data, like date fields, and dates and information in like text fields, for instance, or numbers where there should be text, or like data discrepancies, like that data type errors. Once they had reviewed it, it would go to a sourcing manager who would review it again to make sure that the data that was in the report was, legitimate, that the things that the vendor had said that they had sold were things they were allowed to sell, things like that. And once they had reviewed it, it would go to a data analyst who would review it again to confirm that the first two reviews had been done correctly, and also any other issues that may arise when we upload this report had been ironed out. So that's 3 levels of review already before we even upload this report to an Access database. And we had another spreadsheet that had a bunch of VBA code in the back end of it that we would use to manage this process. And as you can imagine, that was a very finicky spreadsheet. I think at one point the person who created the spreadsheet left, and they took the password to the spreadsheet with them. So that was a challenge getting that back. So the data analyst would upload all this information to an Access database, and at that point, when somebody from sourcing would ask us for information about a contract, like tell me the total spend on this contract, we would then have to go to the database, export it into a spreadsheet. At that point, we would scrub the data and see if there's any huge data errors with it, and try and translate some of the bad information that the vendors had given to us, and then provide it to sourcing manage. So that a whole raft of issues and problems that came up with that system. As you can tell, there's a lot of manual review, a lot of handoffs, a lot of communication between departments. The potential for human error was huge, and the time spent chasing vendors in the first place to actually submit their reports, and who had submitted and who owed us the report, that was all handled with a separate spreadsheet that we kept in a separate place. So the biggest problems we had with this system, the data discrepancies, like I said, the entity names that the vendors would report to us. We had a tough time merging those together and trying to figure out exactly who it was they told that they were telling us they had sold to, and just general data errors in the databases that once we actually uploaded this information. A story I like to tell about how bad this process was is one of the IT contracts that we had. I forget the name of the contract, but it was IT services. The template that we sent to the vendors to fill out had 28,000 records in it, in a hidden column that the vendors couldn't see. The vendors would fill out the spreadsheet, the 1020 sales records that they had, and send it back to us. When we uploaded that report to our database, our VBA application would upload all 28,000 records into our Access database. I think at one point we had over 2 million records in that database of just empty information, just the 2 hidden fields and the metadata about those records, just millions of empty garbage data that because when we would export this data to scrub it anyway, there would be blank information. We didn't know what was blank because the vendor reported it blank, and what was blank because there was an issue with the reporting system. So that was one of the big problems that we found and were able to fix. And just in general, we were collecting a lot of data, a lot of good data, a lot of bad data. The problem was that we were getting so much bad data that we couldn't trust the good data that we were collecting. The integrity of the whole thing was always in question. Because another story I like to tell about how bad it was, vendors sometimes would subtotal their information at the bottom of their sales report. When we uploaded that, the system would think, oh, the subtotal is a new sale, and it would double count everything. So, like I say, the integrity of the data was always in question. We always had to verify everything before we could do anything meaningful with it. And even when we wanted to do something meaningful with it, it took us a long time to pull the information together to create any reporting. One time we had a request to find out how much money the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority had spent on statewide contract across all of the statewide contracts. It took us a week to pull that information together. So a lot of problems. Like I said, I could go hours and hours talking about all the problems that we had with the old system. I won't bore you with any more information about that, but it was always a challenge, and so that's what we set out to fix. So what did we do? How did we fix it? So we spent about a year working with our key stakeholders here at OSD, gathering requirements, and these were the high-level requirements that we came up with. What if we could have an application to collect the reports that were being submitted? What if we could automate notifications to our vendors so that we didn't have to spend time chasing them every quarter? What if we could standardize our data templates so that the information that we got, we could actually compare similar data? What if there was a way to verify and review the data discrepancies and the data input errors and all the other things that vendors, bad information that the vendors were giving us up front? If we could automate that to make it easier for us to review. So we spent a lot of time gathering our requirements. We posted a bit. I think we used one of our statewide contracts to elicit responses for a software solution, and we procured a new system. So we work with a vendor, B2G now, to implement a SaaS solution, software as a service solution, and we used the agile methodology to manage the implementation of the project. We spent a good 6 months in the summer customizing the application to meet the Commonwealth of Massachusetts' needs. B2G, now they have a software application that deals primarily with certification of diverse partners, supply diversity partners. So they built a sales reporting module specifically for this purpose for us, and we were able to customize it with them in those 6 months, spent a lot of time working through our detailed requirements and what we actually wanted the system to do. And so they were a great partner in that regard. And they also helped us with training. The vendor B2G now did a lot of the training of our vendors during that summer. And we did a lot of outreach to the vendors to make sure they were comfortable with what we were doing. So our initial rollout, we started this rollout in July of 2018. We didn't get our first report submitted until in October of 2018. That was when the first quarter of FY19 reports were due. And immediately, they weren't due until November 14, 2018, I think it was, but immediately on October 1st, as soon as we started sending out notifications, we got reports submitted. So what does the new system do? So now, when the quarter ends and a new quarter starts, the system sends a notification to all the vendors who are on a statewide contract for the reporting period that there is a report that they need to submit to us. They will log into the system and they can fill out their information on their sales report. They can upload their sales, or they can type them in manually. They can review the data template that we are asking them to submit. Then that contains all the reporting requirements, what fields they need to submit, what's required, what's not required, what are the acceptable values. All that information is in there. Those reports are then, and even when they upload the reports, any purchasing entity names are translated into our standard naming convention, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But that's when they upload those information. They upload any spend they have with their diverse partners for the quarter. That information is validated up front before they submit the report. In fact, they can't actually submit the report until all these things are done correctly. So they upload, they add their diverse partners, that information is all correct or all in an allowable format. They submit it, goes to a sourcing manager who will review it, and they can review as much or as little as they like with that information. They can download that information and review it line by line, or they can, give it a more cursory review depending on the contract. And that's how the system works at a high level. Just a couple other things to note about how it works. And with B2G, they have a built-in help desk that's built into the system. And so during our rollout period, that was very helpful because vendors could submit their help desk questions within the system without having to email us separately or come to our other dedicated help desk. And BDG were able to do a lot of the initial troubleshooting, password resets, that kind of thing would be done before it even got to us. And then when there was questions about policy of what I should be submitting or why I should be submitting this information, they could be forwarded to us here at OSD and we could answer those questions. And the last thing I wanted to note about the new system is that we had a backend database built here at OSD that's updated daily with the accepted VRM sales reports. And that's a key distinction to make here, is that once the reports are accepted by a sourcing manager, they are batched overnight, and they come to us here, and we upload those into our, I think it's a SQL Server database that we have. I could be wrong, but I think it's a SQL Server database. And that's where we do the bulk of our reporting, from accepted reports. So that's what the new system is. And what did we get as a result of bringing in this brand new system? So the three big wins that we got for all this hard work was the ability to report out our results earlier. In the previous system, we would wait 60 days after the quarter ended before we created any kind of report, or we recorded a report of whose reports were missing, who owed us reports still for that quarter. The reason we did it at 60 days was it took 3 days to create this report. Now, as you'll see later on in this presentation, we can do that kind of reporting at any point in the quarter or any day, and we can also look at the history of what the status of reporting looked like at any day in the quarter. If we wanted to know day 5, how many reports were submitted, what percentage of reports were submitted, we can do that kind of reporting. And no more multiple databases. All the data was in one place. Instead of having a database for every contract category and a separate data table for every contract with all the different data requirements that they had for each contract, it's all in one place, and it makes it much easier for us to report across all of the contracts. So the most innovative part of this new system was the way that we now translate the purchasing entity names. So that's that second point, purchasing entity validation translations. So that's a long-winded way of saying what we do is when a vendor uploads the report, they tell us who they sold to, and we don't ask them to change that information. We just say, tell us who you sold to, and we'll figure out who it is. So they upload it, the system checks those names against a list of names that we have built in. We have over 57,000 names built into the system, and if it finds that name in amongst our 57,000 names, it converts that name into our standard naming convention. So if it's the city of Boston, for instance, we like that to be in the format of Boston, city of, and then the department within the city of Boston, so the police department or the fire department or something like that. But if the vendor reports to us Boston Fire, when they upload that, the application knows, oh, Boston Fire, I know what that is. It translates it to Boston, city of, fire department. And that way we're able to report on the total spend of the fire department in the city of Boston. We don't have to go and find all the different ways that people have submitted that name. One example of this, other than the city of Boston, is the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority. So MWRA is an acronym. Some vendors submit the acronym, some vendors submit the whole name. Some vendors give us typos. It all comes from their own accounting systems or their own ordering systems. So when a name is not in our list of 57,000, the vendors can request an exception. They can still submit their report, and that will come to us, and we can research that and correct it. And once we correct it, that name gets added to the list. So the next quarter, when the vendor submits that same name again, it goes through without any issues. And when we do that translation work, we also add additional tags to this data. We're adding the type, the category of entity that's doing the buying, whether it's an executive branch agency or a housing authority or a nonprofit, for instance. And we're also adding any other tags for like Combis ID, so we can track it with our e-procurement system and various other things. And so that allows us to track this information back to those other systems and see where there are opportunities for maybe for training or for outreach or marketing or anything like that. It gives us some more opportunities to do that kind of work. And the third big win that we got was the customizable reporting templates. So now we have the flexibility to ask for the data fields that are important to the contract that's being reported on. So each contract, obviously, they have different things that they sell. They have different requirements for the information that we want to get back from our vendors when they submit. For example, some contracts, they ask for a brand name or a stock keeping unit or a customer account number. Our sourcing managers can customize their templates to whatever fields they feel like they need or would like to report on, and the system will hold the vendors to that input. So if I say, I want you to put in the environmentally preferred certification of this product you're selling, and here are the list of things that I consider to be acceptable values. If the vendor puts in something that's not in that list, the system won't allow them to submit that report until they pick something from the acceptable values list. It's just an example of that. So those are the three big wins. I mean, just those three would be enough, but we got a lot of other big results from doing this work. But so we're going to go through some other results that we got. So the next thing I want to talk about was improved compliance that we saw as a result of implementing this new system. So the system has an automated notifications that are sent out each quarter. We've been sending out over 10,000 notifications each month to our vendors. There's a schedule that the system follows. So day one, you get a notification to go submit, and then you keep getting a notification every week until the due date, which is the day 45. And then after day 45, you get a different notification which says your report is due now, please submit it. And you get that every 3 days until you submit. Those notifications don't stop until you submit your report. So as a result of that notification, the constant hounding of our vendors that we have that happened before in the old system, but it's just we had to have somebody actually collate who hasn't submitted and then send those people the reminders. Now the system does that all for us. And as a result of that, we've seen an improvement in the time it takes or the speed at which vendors submit. So you can see in this chart here, the blue line at the bottom, that was the first quarter that we implemented the system. Vendors took a little while to get used to it. But that big bright red line, that's the most recent quarter, Q2 of fiscal year 20. And you can see earlier in the quarter, we got to a higher number of reports accepted into our data repository here at OSD. And you see that day 45 is that first vertical blue line. That's the drive for that behavior. So when it gets to day 45 or close to it, the vendors start submitting, and it's at a faster rate. The other thing we can do in terms of compliance is we can see a vendor's history of compliance. We can now look at how long it took each vendor to submit and whether they're getting faster or slower, or which vendors typically take a longer time to get their reports in the door. And now that we know that information, we can use that to maybe reach out to vendors that have had problems in the past and help them submit their reports in the future. Another thing we got as a result of all this work is improved transparency. So this screenshot here is a screenshot from the system. It shows the vendor's reporting history. They blanked out the vendor's names or protect them. But you can see the 3 reports they submitted, the reported sales on this contract. This is for TRDR1, a tradesperson's contract, and it's a diverse expenditure that they had. This is probably a bad example for that because they don't actually have to report that on TRDR1. But anybody who has access to the system within OSD can go and look at a vendor's history of reporting and see if any of these reports are missing, and they can send messages to the vendor through the system saying, hey, this report is missing, can you submit this one? The system also keeps a track of all of that back and forth between OSD staff and the vendors. Any message that you send is kept. Any time you send a report back to a vendor for them to put more information in or provide some clarity to something, the message is kept. We have a history of that. Folks can go in there and they can look at all those notifications and see what occurred when they're trying to figure out why something happened or why a vendor's not been compliant in the past. All that information is right there. So now I'm a data analyst. I like charts. I put a bunch of charts into this presentation because, I mean, like I say, I'm a data analyst. I love charts. As a result of doing this work, we were able to produce a whole bunch of new charts and graphs, and so I got a collection of things that I would like to show. And like I say, we're very proud of all this work that we've done. So this report, before I get into this, I just wanted to say that the system itself has some canned reports that you can produce, and some of it we were collecting and exporting and putting into spreadsheets and things like that, but you can also report from the system. You can report from data repository we get here of all the accepted reports. There's a bunch of different ways you can get information out of the system, but this report here shows the history of vendors submitting in terms of a percentage of the total that we expect and the number of reports. That's the numbers in the blue bars at the bottom. And the improvement quarter over quarter since we brought in the new system. So Q1, fiscal 19, on day 50, which is today, 50th day of the quarter, we had 54% of our vendors were reporting. But right now, in the most recent quarter, 85% of the reports are accepted. So that's a huge improvement. This report we wouldn't have been able to produce in the old system. And that's something I want to note about all of these reports I'm going to show you, all these charts I'm going to show you, would have been impossible to produce with our old system, or near impossible to produce. So that's the first chart I wanted to show you. Second chart I wanted to show you, I like this chart because it shows how close to completion we are with our fiscal year 19 reporting. So that first bar on the left is fiscal year 19. It's blue for accepted, orange for pending reports, and gray for reports that have been submitted and are waiting for staff here to review. As you can see, for FY19, we are so close to being 100%. I think we're at 99.5, over 99.5% of our reports have been accepted for FY19. For FY20, well, I think we're just over 90% reports accepted. And in each quarter, we obviously get new reports that go in there. But I like to show that graph because it shows you, 99.5% accepted is just, such a huge difference compared to our old system. I think when we brought this in and we were doing new reporting in FY19 in October of 2018, we were still collecting reports from FY16 and FY17 and getting those reports in the door. So right now, here we sit in February 2020 and 99.5% completed FY19. That's a huge improvement. The next chart I want to show you is the improvement in the time lapse it's taken for folks to get reports both submitted and accepted. So the blue lines are the average number of days it took for vendors to submit their reports. The orange line is the average number of days it took for folks here at OSD. So for the vendors to submit and for folks here at OSD to accept the report. The gray line is the average number of days the vendors were late with their reporting, and the gold line is the average number of days it took OSD staff to review and accept reports. And you can see Q1, 61 days it took on average vendors to submit. We got that down to 39 now. 71 days for the full process from report creation to report acceptance. That's down to 42 now. And we're down to 3 days on average for our folks here to review the reports. And one key thing I want to note about this graph is that our due date is 45 days after the quarter end. So you can see for FY19 Q4, the average number of days it took to get submitted and accepted is 3 days earlier than the due date. So we were getting reports in the door and reviewed and accepted before the due date. So those three charts are more to do with management of the system, making sure the vendors are submitting on time and getting their reports in the door. That's the stuff I care about as a data analyst looking at the performance of the system and monitoring that stuff. But the people that we implemented the system for, they don't care so much about this stuff. They care about the actual data that we're collecting, the spend. So there's some charts about the spend. So this chart shows the total spend of VRM reports in our data repository. As you can see, Q4, the big gold bar of FY19 is the largest one, as you would expect with public purchasing entities. The fiscal quarter 4 is always going to be where the bulk of the money is spent. The green bar at the end, that's the current quarter. Right now, we're in the process of reviewing and accepting a lot of our reports, and a lot of our vendors that have a lot of big dollars on them, sometimes take longer to get submitted. So expect that number to jump up to around 400, over 430 million by the time we're done with this quarter. But you can see for Q1 of FY20 was an improvement on Q1 of FY19, those two blue bars, which did more sales than the quarter that just passed. So that's the overview. This kind of report we could have done with our old system, the totals, and that's about the limitation of what we could have got to. So the next chart, this is the kind of stuff that we couldn't get to with the old system. This is the total reported executive branch spend in VRM. And we can create this report ad hoc. It takes about 5 minutes to create it. We can do it for any category of entity that we like to look at. So this is for executive branch agencies. We could do this for municipalities. We could do this for non-executive departments. We could do it for eligible nonprofits. Whatever you're interested in seeing, we could create this graph for you. And again, the pattern's still the same. Q4, FY19, that was the largest quarter. One other thing when I created this graph I thought was interesting was the similarity in FY19 Q2 and Q3. I think they're off by $5,000, which is I thought was interesting, but that's a rabbit hole for another day to go down. So, the next chart I want to show you is the next level down from that. So instead of just executive branch agencies, now I'm looking at housing authority spend on energy contracts. So not just the entity category, but also the category of contract that we're looking at. And the interesting thing about this graph is the huge increase in Q3 the spend. It's way higher than any of the other quarters. Now, anybody who knows anything about New England winters would maybe have an idea of why Q3 would be a larger spend for energy contracts and for housing authorities, being fiscal quarter 3 contains the months of January through March. And so I saw that and I thought I'm going to do a little bit more digging to see if I can find if my assumption is true about what that spend entails. And so the next graph, something that I keep saying it, but this one we would never been able to create with our old system, confirms my bias, my thoughts. Number 2, heating oil. That's where all the spend was in that quarter. Much larger spend than what we would typically see in other quarters. So, like I say, New England winters, people got the heat on. The housing authorities are spending more on heating oil, and it results in that increase. And one thing I think is interesting is that, so for FY20, when we start getting the reports for quarter 3 in April, we've had a much milder winter here this year. Will that spend decrease because of that, or will it stay around the same, or what will happen? So that kind of analysis and asking those kind of questions about why these numbers look this way, we were never able to do that before. But now we're collecting all this data. We're just kind of starting to get into this rhythm of asking, what does that mean? Why is that number that way? Let's do some digging and find out what we can, if we get any meaningful insights from that information that we can use to do our jobs better and more effectively. So that was just a sampling of the charts that we produced now. I hope you enjoyed my little walk through my data analysis charts. But yeah, much improved, such a huge improvement over what we used to have. So something that folks, maybe not so much me the data analysts, but a lot of other folks really do care about is the cost reductions. And so we got a lot of that too as a result of this project. We had a data, like I say, we had a data analyst whose full-time job was uploading these reports. That job role no longer exists, so that analyst was able to be, and that job role was able to be assigned to other projects, actually reviewing the data that we were collecting rather than just trying to collect it in the first place. We also removed a lot of the burden for review from our sourcing coordinators. They spent 75% of their time reviewing these reports and monitoring those inboxes, and that job function doesn't exist now either. So we're able to reassign those folks to doing other things, other sourcing initiatives like procurement file standardization and other projects. Another thing that we noticed from the vendor side is it's much easier for vendors to submit their reports now, especially vendors who have $0 on their reports. So we have a lot of vendors who don't make any sales in the quarter. We still require them to submit their reports so that we can confirm they didn't have any sales in the quarter. Right now, that process is 3 button presses and you're done. It's much easier to do that. And the other big cost reduction that I want to note, it's not really a reduction, but the total cost of the project came in way under budget. I think we budgeted for $500,000 for the project, and with the software implementation, and the staff that we used to implement, and all the other associated costs with the database developers creating the database here, and all the other things that we had to do as a result of this, I think we ended up spending just under $200,000, so came in way under budget of what we had projected this thing to cost us. And just a couple of other additional benefits. 2 programs here at OSD that use the VRM data, not as much as sourcing maybe, but more than most of the other departments. So supply diversity, they do an annual report. The data that we collect in our VRM reports is used in that annual report. Being able to collect this information quicker and do a lot of the validation up front of who was a valid SDO partner and who wasn't a valid SDO partner allowed us to create those reports much quicker. And for our environmental purchasing program, a lot of the custom column information, like the extra information that we collect, is for our EPP program. And I know our EPP manager here, she likes to tell me how much time she has saved as a result of this. I think 2 months of scrubbing data that she used to have to do is no longer required. But as a result of all the data cleansing that we do up front now and being able to put things into the different category buckets correctly, we're able to do a lot of EPP reporting to like the municipality level now, whereas we weren't able to do that before. And the other big benefit of this is that because it's so much easier to create these reports, if you wanted to create these reports at a faster cadence, so instead of doing it on an annual basis, do it on a quarterly basis, the potential is there that we could do that too. So just a couple of lessons learned. Here, I'll get to the end of my presentation here. 2 big ones that we learned. Our initial data templates that we started with, they could have been tied under some data points that we asked for, that we didn't ask for originally, we could have asked for, such as zip code or contract category. One thing that became important for our sourcing managers was being able to do like geolocation or like heat mapping things, seeing where the spend was within the state. We weren't able to do that unless we get a zip code or some kind of delivery information, so we had to add that on afterwards. But one of the good things about the system is that if you need to change your data templates, the flexibility is there. You can add fields, delete fields, change whether the field is required or not, change what the accepted values are in a field within the quarter, and then the next quarter when you ask the vendors to submit, they go in, they see their data template, they know what they have to submit. And the other big lesson learned is remember at the beginning of this presentation I talked about the 3 reports that we ask our vendors to submit. This system took care of 2 of those, but there's still one that's outstanding, which is the admin fee report and the payment of the administrative fee. That's still being handled by a separate system. A lot of our vendors got confused about which system did which reporting. We would get questions about the admin fee in the VRM portal. We would get questions about VRM in the admin fee portal. So maybe we could have done a better job communicating the difference between the 2 and where the vendors needed to go to do their reporting for each one. It may have made that a little easier. But I will say that these lessons learned, while they were important, the rollout was pretty successful. There were no major issues that we had during Q1 of FY19. There was no big delays. The issues that we had in Q1 were quickly resolved, and now we're getting reporting at a pretty quick cadence each quarter. And like I say, the reports are getting submitted and accepted at a much earlier rate each quarter. So where are we going next with this information? So we have just, I think in the last couple of months, purchased a new data visualization tool called Click that we're going to use to create some more meaningful analytics for our stakeholders, a lot of interactive charts and graphs that they'll be able to work on and create and make their lives easier that way. We're also exploring using the application to collect the administrative fee, which will remove a lot of that confusion that we had with the 3 reports. So that's my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions you folks have. Before we end, I want to say a couple of thank yous to the people who helped with this project. So my team in operations here at OSD, Anthony Bassett, Chuck Puckwell, Donna Ellis, these folks, Rajiv and his team. Some of these folks aren't here anymore, but if they're listening, thank you guys. Couldn't have done it without you. Also, our folks in sourcing who helped us a lot with their expertise and their input and their involvement and making sure that they worked very hard to make this project a success. And of course, a huge thank you to the folks at B2G Now who built the system. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to be so successful. They were a superb partner in every respect, and very grateful to all the effort that they put in building this application. So that's my presentation. If anybody has any questions.
Hey, Jonathan.
Sure.
Lori here. Looks like we've had some questions come in during the presentation, so I'm just going to start going through them right now with you, okay?
Okay.
The first one was, when exactly did the new system go live? Can you give us a date?
When did it go live?
Yes.
We went live in July of 2018. So what that, remember, go live is the system was active and vendors could log into it, but we didn't actually require them to submit any reports until October of 2018. So the first reports that we had submitted were the Q1 of FY19. They were due November of 2018, and so the system was live July, but there wasn't very much to do in it until October. It's probably the best answer I say. But once we were able to spend those 3 months between July and October getting our vendors acclimatized to it and getting them into the system, making sure their logins and passwords and all that kind of stuff work correctly. So it gave us a good lead time. Just the way the nature of these reports are, that's just how it panned out that way. But yeah, July was when it was live.
The next question is kind of a follow-up to that. And what was the reaction from your vendors when you initially went live to when you started mandating it?
So for most of our vendors, it was largely positive, because what we were able to do with the translations and with the data templates especially, well, translation especially I should say, is for the vendors it wasn't hugely different. They were still filling out a spreadsheet and uploading the spreadsheet or sending us the spreadsheet. The vendors who had the biggest problems were the vendors who had a lot of records. So some vendors have up to 100,000 records in their sales reports. Some of those vendors had a tough time getting the reports in. But for a lot of our vendors, we have I think it's about 30%. I forget the number off the top of my head. But a lot of our vendors, they don't make any sales in a quarter, so that they, for them it's 3 button clicks and then they were done. So for those guys, it was a big increase. But we did a vendor survey, and the reaction was largely positive. The help desk with B2G Now really helped with that rollout process, because they were able to take care of a lot of the, I can't log into the system, I don't understand where to go, the logins, the links, and where to go to get that information. They were able to take a lot of the burden of that kind of question off of us here at OSD, and we could concentrate on the policy stuff, making sure it worked properly.
And the next question kind of just builds upon that, and that is, do you have maybe a general figure for what exactly this system cost in hard dollars?
Well, the best number I have is that one I kind of alluded to earlier, the $200,000. But that's the total cost of everything that was in our Cronin submission. But if we need to get a better number, I could. Somebody wants to shoot me an email, my information up there. I can find that figure for them.
And
it doesn't really answer the question, but I'm sorry, but I'll do my best.
No, absolutely. And for any attendee that's listening, if today's presentation concludes and you have questions, if you want to reach out to me, Lori, you can do that, and I'll talk with Jonathan and get whatever information it is that you guys need. I'm always happy to help, guys. My next question is, can you maybe take us through what the day-to-day system administration looks like?
day-to-day system administration. So one thing about the nature of the reports is they are like cyclical, and it's around the same kind of time from every quarter that we get busy with this. So around day 45, there is a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of sourcing managers going in and reviewing reports and accepting or rejecting them, or us in operations doing the translation work. But once we get to day 60 and the bulk of the reports are in, there really isn't a ton of work that needs to be done. So that month, so once we're done with this quarter, we'll have the month of March, where really it's an afterthought until we get to April 1st and vendors start submitting again. So it's kind of, peaks and valleys, right? You get a busy period, had to work really hard to get it done, and maybe set aside some time, and then it goes down again. One thing that we're able to do now is that we'll be able to do in the past, and the data analytics team here has been really good with this type of stuff, is being able to predict when are the busy times going to be. When am I going to get a spike in vendors submitting? When am I going to have to do the bulk of my work? Maybe we should look at not scheduling meetings or other things that are going to take up a lot of my time during the time when I'm predicting that I'm going to have the most work to do this quarter with VRM stuff. Does that make sense?
I would say it did to me. If anybody needs some follow-up, please just let us know in the chat function. I'm watching both boxes right now. Our next question comes from, hey, Greg Oliveira. How are you? Our next question comes from Greg, and Greg would like to know, would you be willing to provide maybe a quick demo of the system if a state was interested in it?
Sure. I mean, my contact information is that I've done it for other states in the past after I spoke at the DASPO conference. So if folks are interested, shoot me an email or give me a call, and we can set something up. I'd be happy to walk you through it and what it looks like. Happy to do
Our
that.
next question comes from Ian, and Ian would like to know which environmental or sustainability metrics is the system tracking, and how robust is this data that you're getting?
Okay. So this is really a question for EPP manager more, but I will say that because of the flexibility of the customizable data templates, you can ask vendors to submit whatever you would like them to submit. So for some contracts, I know where we ask for a lot of information about EPP. So cleaning products, for instance, we ask for the brand name of the product. I don't know off the top of my head all the other different things, but there's like 10 fields of extra data that we ask for that contract, for instance. Or recycling is another one we ask for a lot of information on it. And I know that our EPP manager uses a lot of that data to put into the calculator that she used to calculate environmental benefits. So that's where all that information comes from. So I would say that the data is very robust. It's, we're able to order a lot of that stuff, and she's able to review it. She used to have to do a lot of scrubbing of the data before, and that doesn't have to happen anymore because we were able to hold vendors to the standard of what we want the vendors to submit up front. So we can assign a list of acceptable values, for instance. And if the vendor doesn't put in an acceptable value, they can't even submit their report. So that helps in making sure the data is more robust that actually gets to us.
It looks like we have another question that just came in, and that is, if you had the opportunity to do it all over again and go through this entire process all over again, what would you have done differently now that you've been through it?
So, I mean, I think it's the data templates, spending more time figuring out exactly what it is that we wanted our vendors to report before we started would have made it a little easier with the rollout. I know I had that as a lesson learned earlier, but honestly, we really didn't have any huge incidences when we rolled it. It's one of the smoothest software implementations I think I've ever been involved in. We really didn't have a huge amount of problems, but yeah, we did. The one thing I will say that was that contributed to the success of this is we spent a lot of time doing requirements gathering. a lot of time before we even posted our RFR for the software that we were looking for. And that was even before we had done some analysis of the data that we were collecting and what we needed to use it for, before we even decided, oh wait, we need to improve the way that we collect this data. And once we decided that that's a project that we were going to embark on, we spent almost a year gathering requirements from our key stakeholders and really nailing down the key things that we wanted to get. So that when we went out to bid, we had, a really detailed list, and it made the whole process a lot smoother, I think.
Oh, looks like we've had a couple more questions come in. This one's coming from Tia, who would like to know, can you talk to us a little bit about how the contract data was loaded into the system?
How the contract data is loaded into the system. So the upload process, if you have like a handful of records on your sales report, it's like filling in a web form. You can fill in each form with the required fields and hit save and next, and then it gives you another web form. You fill that out until you're done. So that's for if you have 10 or less, you can do it that way. It's pretty simple. If you have more than that, the system has an upload function. And it's not like an attachment, like uploading an attachment. It actually does a lot of cool stuff when you upload the report. So it has a 4-step process. So when you upload, the first step it looks for is it makes sure that you uploaded a spreadsheet for one, and that the template is named the right thing, and that all the column headers in the template match the data template that we were asking you to submit. So check that first, and if it doesn't like it, it will give you an error and it won't let you proceed. Next thing it checks for is if the data that's in those fields meets the requirements for that field. So if I want a date in a set field and it's not a date, it won't let you proceed. If I have a number or an accepted value or something, a restriction on that column, it won't let you move forward until you fix those errors. And then the third thing it checks for is the purchasing entity names, and it does the translation, and it will tell you, we translated 500 names, and 1,000 of these names didn't match our translation list, and what do you want to do about it? And then you can ask for an exception at that point and still submit, and those 1,000 names, when you submit your report, come to us in operations, and we translate those. So the upload process it's simple to, when you do it, it's very intuitive. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're done. But it does a lot of validation at that point, so that before you even get to the position where you can actually submit a report to us for us to review it, a lot of that review of making sure that you're giving us something that we can actually use is done up at that point. So that's how it works with the uploads. And that's kind of one of those things that, like the other question you said, it's kind of hard to explain how it looks. It's much easier to show you how it looks. And if folks are really interested in a demo, I'm more than happy to demo the upload function, because, like I say, it does a lot of cool stuff, and it's it's made our lives a lot easier here in Massachusetts.
All right, looks like we have another question, and this one's coming from Lisa. And Lisa would like to know, to what kind of extent is the system customized? What are all the options of things that you can customize within the system?
Okay. So this is kind of a weird question, because, not a weird question, but I'm going to give a weird answer here, because the system itself is highly customizable. So this is the system that B2G Now provide. But what B2G Now, what they actually do, what their main business is supply diversity certifications. So they didn't really do sales reporting until we worked with them to produce this thing. So this sales reporting module was basically built from scratch with a lot of customizable, things customized specifically for us. And during that whole process, when we were working with them, they were always coming at it from the point of view of, I know that's how you do it in Massachusetts, but we're not going to do it exactly how you want to do it. We want to do it the best way, and we want to do it in a generic way, so that if other folks need to use this application, it will translate to other business needs too. But their application is very customizable. You can make a lot of different changes into it, but it's customizable by, they do a lot of the customization or the configuration, I should say. We work with them to do that stuff, so we don't actually configure all stuff here on our end. It's mostly B2G that does that stuff.
Okay, it looks like we have 2 more questions. The first is coming from Carter Marshall, who would like, we already talked about the cost, but can you talk about maybe maintenance costs that are associated with the system, so maybe different from that initial like $200,000 estimate that you gave us?
Yeah, so we pay a license fee every year. I think it's yearly. I think it's about $40,000 we pay for license fee to use the software, and with that we get B2G now. They work with us when any system issues come up. We don't really have a ton of maintenance, but we are gonna. So with the admin fee stuff, obviously that piece of it would be an extra enhancement to the system, but also things like tightening up the supply diversity reporting process or making any enhancements or additions to the application. We constantly working with B2G now to fix those things. So we have a good relationship with them. The licensing fee is really the only kind of maintenance thing that we pay them at the moment. But I think if we wanted to make big changes, they would be open to that, and I think there would probably be a fee attached to that. But yeah, probably.
Okay. Let's see here. Our next question is, see here. This one's coming from Tim Kennedy, and he's asking, do you have an estimate of the effort to create and maintain the database of entity names at the go live versus your current state?
So after go live, it was a lot of work. The first quarter we had was a lot of work, but we actually had the basis of that entity names list from our old system, because we were trying to do that, we just couldn't keep up with it, and we didn't have an automated way to do it. So we had a list of names that we imported into the system when we went live. First quarter we got a ton of new stuff that we had to translate. That was a lot of effort. I think it was 3 of us at least a week to kind of narrow that stuff down. And during the last year, during the fiscal year FY19, we did do a project where we went through the whole list of 50,000, and we tried to eliminate anything that was vague, anything that was, didn't meet our naming standards. We tried to standardize that a lot. So this is a constant process. What we've noticed is that every quarter we have less and less to do in terms of new names. The most recent quarter being an exception because OSD spent a lot of time last quarter working with the Tri-Quarter Massachusetts, getting them into combines and using our e-procurement system. So now the Tri-Quarter is using this thing. They weren't using a statewide contract before, for instance. That's a lot of new buying entities that show up in the list that we had to translate. So it's like a double-edged, sort of like the balance there, right? The names go down as you get each quarter and people get used to it and the vendors get used to it and they understand the restrictions of what they can submit and what they can't submit. But anytime that the rest of the agency decides we're going to try and get a big new customer on board and they're going to have all this extra work, it kind of ends up downstream in our lab too to translate those names as well. So it is a constant battle. It is work. We're trying to figure out the time frame for that stuff, like how quickly we need to get these names translated. And that's the kind of thing that we're using the data that we're collecting now to influence those decisions. So data-driven decision-making, right? We're getting all this data now, so let's use it to be more efficient and to be better.
Oh, and looks like Jonathan, I had somebody clarify one of their questions, and so I apologize for not fully understanding. But a kind of a clarification. So earlier I asked you, to what extent was the system customized? So. Okay. I thought that was pertaining to, like, what are all the options that you can customize within the system. However, after some clarification from one of our attendees, that question was actually wanting to be focused more on what kind of customization did you elect to do to the system versus, out-of-the-box kind of functionality.
Okay. So look, the sales reporting module was totally custom because it was brand new. It wasn't out of the box at the time. So it's kind of tough to figure out like what customizations were as a result of us pushing them to change it versus them saying this is how we wanted to do it. One big thing that we work with B2G now to customize in the application is that the translation stuff. So originally when we started working with them, they had the list of exceptions, new names to translate. And they would say, okay, well, here's all the stuff you have to translate. You have to go in line by line and see each one and say, okay, that's a valid entity name or that's not a valid entity name on each record. What they customize for us is a separate area that's kind of cordoned off from the rest of the system where we can see all of the new names that vendors have submitted in a real like user-friendly way. Like they actually appear as little tiles. So me and my colleagues in operations will look at that screen of all the little tiles like a little game. You like pick a tile, you figure out what is the name of the vendor that or the name of the buying entity that they submitted, and then translate it into how we want it to show. That whole section of the tiles and the being able to translate things on bulk, that was all customized for us beyond what the B2G had originally created for us. Because like I said, it was brand new for them. They created a sales reporting module based on the requirements that we had, and then we spent a good 6 months tinkering with it, and we would test it, and they would say, okay, that's a great idea, let's do that, and then making it more user-friendly. And one thing they did do for us as well is they came on site in, I think it was June, before we rolled out, they sent some guys over here to do like user training with our staff, and we all got all of our sourcing managers into a room with the B2G Now folks, and we went through how the process worked, and they took all of our feedback, and they did like, kind of, what things would you love to see, what things that would you like to see, and what things are like pie in the sky dreams that you would love to see. And actually, one thing now I think about it that B2G do in their system, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but they have a separate section of the system called a wish list. And what that is that any user who uses the system, so not just us in Massachusetts who use the sales reporting module piece, but any other state or entity that is using them for any other purpose, you can go into the wish list and you can say, I think it would be great if you did this, or you had a button that did that, or any kind of enhancement you think would be useful. And so their developers, they review that wish list, and other staff members can review the wish list. And if you see something in the wish list that you think, oh, that's a great idea, you can upvote it or downvote it. And then when things get enough upvotes, the developers will try and implement it. And so that's kind of a cool way of saying, like, there's all these folks in, I think Philadelphia uses it, city of Philadelphia, but like they're out there and they're saying, it'd be great if there was something you could do with the inbox and way that we communicate with vendors in the system. And I'm sitting here in Massachusetts like, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to upvote that, we should do that. And then some of these great ideas, B2G actually do implement them. So they do customize, they're constantly customizing it in that way. So I hope that answered the question. It's kind of a long-winded answer.
Yes. I just had some confirmation that it is that was more of the information that she was looking for. Lisa, I apologize. I didn't make the connection between the two, but I hope that we got you the information that you were needing. All right, it looks like that is all of the questions right now. So, yay, I'm so glad that I was able to help you, Miss Lisa. I'm so glad. Well, all right, guys. Well, thank you all so much again for attending our webinar today. Jonathan, I really appreciate your time in speaking with us. All the attendees, thank you so much for listening. As we wrap up, just a couple of reminders, guys. As soon as the webinar closes, it's going to redirect you to a short survey. The survey in total, I believe, is 3 questions, maybe 4. If you would just fill out those questions for me, it really, really, really helps me on my end. I would greatly appreciate it. For anyone who would like to receive that certificate for 1 UPPCC credit hour, please email me. I put my email a couple of times in the chat function, but in case you missed it, it's L Denhart, L, D as in David, E, N as in Nancy, HART @NASPO.org. And finally, everybody, don't forget to check out NASPO.org for information on upcoming webinars and conferences, as well as all the great resources that we provide for our members' use. Our next Cronin webinar is going to be next Thursday, February 27th, and it's going to be with the, drum roll, great state of New York. So please, please, please stop back by and see us. Jonathan, thank you again for everything. You've been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone have a great day and have a great weekend.